from the rain and the stone, where the wind has no name and the traveler's alone. There's warmth in the fire and truth in the tale of the watcher who walks where the bold-hearted fail.
He carries no sword, yet the darkness gives way to the lantern he lifts at the end of the day. He stands on the watchtower, still and unswayed, where the lost find a path through the fog and the fray. Pilgrim gray, oh steward of lands, you carry the light in your weather-worn hands. A tale at the hearth, a guide through the night. You open the gate between the wrong and the right.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pilgrim's Great Chronicles. Welcome to the Inn, which is currently my recording studio. I've been recording all weekend and today, and I know that's not the way you should lay a guitar against your speaker, but I've been so busy, I just don't have time to do anything right. And so between recording riffs over the weekend, I can't wait to share the album with you. But in the meantime, you know, if you love our show, I know we're down to one show a week now on Mondays, but I really appreciate it if those of you who love it and listen would share the show, like on YouTube, subscribe to us, leave a 5-star review on the Spotify programs, streaming services like Apple. The more that happens, if you just take a few seconds to do that for us, it really helps us in so many ways that you wouldn't believe. It gets us out there. It gets us more seen. I get more offers to do things like the bigger the audience, really, and the more we're spread out, we get advertisers, people who may want to sponsor the show, things of that nature. And then maybe I can go back to doing 3 shows a week once I'm able to retire from work, or even do a show every day. Maybe not. That's crazy. I can't do a show every day. I have to live a life too, but you get the drift. Anyway, for the longest time on the show, since February, when we released our first show about Tartaria, some people loved it, and some people, rightfully, I guess, complained that it didn't have enough history or what they were looking for, or they felt it was too overtly throughout the entire thing, too heavily Christian oriented. I pointed out that part of the whole reason I did the show was because many people in the Satan's Little Season community believed that Tartaria might have been one explanation for the millennial reign, right along with other things. And so I wanted to clear that up, and in order to do so, I had to rely heavily on scripture. So I've, in my comment section, it was also done with AI voicing, which a lot of people didn't care for either, and I didn't necessarily care for it at the time either, but I had even less time than I have now, and so I had to write up my script and then have AI voice just read it for me, because I didn't have time to record, and I didn't have some of the equipment like my wonderful Shure 57 mic here, or whatever it is, and things of that nature. I just didn't have it in the studio. I was more set up for recording guitar stuff and other musical stuff, like the keyboard over here on my right, just things like that. And so now that I'm doing it this way, and I promised a lot of people I would get around to doing a new Tartaria video, here we are. I'm going to be doing, again, this hidden history of Tartaria, their lost technology, and the seeming timeline erasure of Tartaria. Why are these past cultures like Tartaria, Atlantis, some of the Greco-Roman Empire, and other things just seem to be either misrepresented, made out to be archaic people who didn't know what they were doing, or they're not as smart as us, didn't have our kind of technology, whatever. They're downplayed because of the theory of evolution that came about in the mid to late 1800s, where, you know, they had to put forward this idea that we were, you know, mildly retarded at some point and mated with apes, and here we are. But I mean, when we look at the timeline of history and we look back at things like Göbekli Tepe and other monumental structures when allegedly the wheel hadn't even been created, it's just laughable. We know they're full of it. So I wanted to just go over some of this, and hopefully you'll find some of it interesting, because when I was doing this study, I came across things that I didn't know before, and I'm sure some of you probably have, and that's great. Feel free to add even more in the comments because I do find this kind of thing fascinating. And it's oh, by the way, while I was working on the album, I got inspired by our first album, Elevensies. This is the album cover for it, The Grey Wanderer. It's a concept album. And this album, which will be called The 12s, is also a concept album. And I'll just leave it at that. You'll hear it when it comes out, which probably will be finished with everything this week. And probably by the time the streaming services are weird. So you upload it all to the streaming services and it takes probably a week before it gets totally released out there for people to stream. That's just how long it takes. Could take a day or two, could take 7 days, but it just depends. So let's get right into this because I've got a lot of material to cover here, and I want to get it all in, and I don't want to have to skip over any notes if I don't have to. So let's take a look here, where for centuries we've had Western sources regularly referenced Tartaria as a vast region in Central and Northern Asia. Early modern maps and encyclopedias depicted Great Tartary, spanning from Siberia and Mongolia to parts of China and Turkestan. The travelogues and reports well into the 19th and even early 20th century still use Tartary in their titles. For example, E.D. Clark's Travels in Russia, Tartary in Turkey from 1810, or Owen Lattimore's High Tartary in 1930. But by the mid-1900s, the term had all but vanished from maps and textbooks, and it was replaced by more specific nation states, the breaking up of this greater Tartary, right? So this abrupt disappearance fuels theories that an entire empire's history was deliberately erased, and rightfully so. Alternative historians, and I hate using that term, but I use it so that you know what I'm referencing, points to events in the 18th through 19th centuries that might have marked Tartaria's downfall. Russian authors Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky argue that consensual world history was manufactured in Europe in the 16th to roughly 19th centuries to obscure a powerful evil empire of Eurasia, Greater Tartary, which threatened European hegemony. They interpret events like the 1770s Pugovich Rebellion in Russia as a final war to destroy Tartaria's influence. Indeed, older Russian records did refer to a massive Tartar realm in Siberia, and the 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica entry for Tartary described it as a vast country in the north parts of Asia. So it did exist. These people who say it's a fantasy realm, I mean, it was literally in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And by the 1850s, however, academic atlases had quietly dropped the name, and Tartaria's historic timeline, acknowledged in other books, and like the encyclopedias, was seemingly edited out by the 20th century. And proponents of the Tartaria theory believe this was a deliberate reset of human memory, concealing an advanced global civilization that existed into the 19th century. So one intriguing thread comes from the 18th century mystic Emanuel Swedenborg and his True Christian Religion from 1771. Swedenborg claimed that remnants of the most ancient divine revelation, or the ancient word, survived in Great Tartary. Romantic poet William Blake seized on this idea, weaving Tartary into his own mythology as a symbol of suppressed primordial wisdom buried by oppressive powers, and such esoteric references hint that Tartary's legacy might have been more than just a geographic label. It was associated with lost knowledge, and whether through political rewriting of history or the natural drift of academic terminology, by 1930, Tartaria had been consigned to obscurity. Today's researchers, combining old books and maps, are resurrecting Tartaria's ghost, convinced that its history was deliberately erased from modern consciousness. So across the world, 18th and 19th century buildings display perplexing architectural anomalies that some attribute to a forgotten civilization. I think one of the best podcasts on this subject that I like listening to is My Lunch Break. He does a great job of hilariously pointing out the ridiculousness of the mainstream narrative, and time again points out how absurd it is. I don't think he's right in every case, but he's right so often and often enough and has enough information there that I don't see how you can say otherwise. There's something definitely incredibly fishy about the explanations. So a core observation of part of this evidence of an older civilization is mud flood architecture. Structures with a buried first floors, half submerged windows and doors at ground level as if the street rose or the building sank. And these features are found in cities from Paris and London to St. Petersburg and Boston, where many old edifices show windows that are peeking out from below the street grade, or doors that have been reworked where you can see the rest of it below ground, and it looks as if the door was way bigger, and they just took the foundation from where the mud had covered the bottom of the building, created a new foundation and a new entry, and reshaped and made a new door. But it looked like the original door was probably twice that height, like 20 feet tall instead of, a normal 8 to 10 foot door. So these features, again, they're found everywhere. And critics say these are just simply basements or the result of cities, elevating roadways over time. But it doesn't look that way. I've seen the pictures. And yes, probably some of it can be explained occasionally by that, but not all of it. And there's just too much. And so the mud flood theorists would ask, why would so many grand buildings be designed with full windows and ornate entrances underground? Right? They view it as evidence that those structures were originally at ground level and that a cataclysmic event buried cities under many feet of mud. I wanted to share with you, if I could, some of this so you can see what it is I'm talking about. Let us go here and leave. What we're looking for is right here. No, you don't want to see that. But here is a map of Tartaria, or La Grande Tartaria. Strange, since allegedly it didn't exist. But here we have a full drawn-out map. Another map here, if it will come. I had a better version of this. Oh, there we are. Just took a minute for it to load up the high-definition version. But you can see, this was one of the original maps. See, this would be the greater area, this annexed, and then the culture of it spread all over the world is the idea. And then I have, I believe, that is not it. That is not it either. Here we are. Here's an example. Another one. I mean, you look at this and you're just like, there's no way. I mean, that's a whole nother structure underneath here. It's crazy. And so according to the mud flood hypothesis, a worldwide or hemispheric disaster, perhaps in the early 80s, suddenly deposited mud and sediment engulfing entire cities. And adherents note that numerous historical photos show city crews excavating deep layers of soil around major buildings like this one on the screen, or muddy streets with half-buried architecture, suggesting a cleanup of some earlier inundation. For instance, images exist of excavations in Washington, D.C., and Moscow where ornate building facades extend well below the current ground surface. And proponents believe these aren't mere reconstructions, but rather digs to uncover older structures after a reset. They also point to eerie late 19th century photographs of capital cities around the world, grand boulevards, palaces, and they're completely devoid of people or traffic, as if the population had just been wiped out or disappeared. And in the few images where people appear, there's a stark contrast where locals in horse carts sloshing through muddy streets, while these massive, elaborate stone cathedrals and capitol towers are behind them, like it's another world. And they were just dropped in there with their horses and buggies. And so this, they argue, is consistent with the scenario in which survivors reoccupied the empty cities that they found after a depopulation event. So beyond buried buildings, anomalously advanced architecture raises eyebrows all around the globe, right? Strikingly similar designs, capitol buildings with massive domes and porticos, star-shaped fortresses with geometric precision, soaring cathedrals, ornate Greco-Roman facades, styles far more grandiose than anyone would expect for frontier colonies or young republics. So the presence of identical monumental styles on different continents in the age long before globalization is cited as general evidence that a single advanced civilization Tartaria and its influence must have built them. And the star forts, in particular, intricate bastion forts shaped like stars, dot the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa, and other places by the hundreds. Officially, these star forts were military constructions of the early modern era, but their sheer number and engineering perfection puzzles researchers. Many were built in places and times where local resources and know-how seemed completely insufficient. Right? At the time, they had what my lunch break refers to as Donkey Incorporated. And there's no way they accomplished this in the claimed time of the building of these structures. And alternative scholars suggest these structures predate the colonial era and were part of an older, high civilization's global network. And there seems to be some validity to this. So mudflood theorists merge these clues into a dramatic narrative. A highly advanced empire, once built, unified architectural masterpieces worldwide, harnessing principles of design and engineering that we barely grasp today. Then a cataclysm, right? This great mud flood struck, causing mass depopulation and literally burying this empire's cities in mud. So the survivors, lacking the knowledge to build such marvels, simply dug them out and claimed they built them or discovered them. And this, according to the theory, explains why so many 19th century Gilded Age city halls, railroad terminals, capitals, and exposition buildings appeared in the blink of an eye with no clear construction photos, and why so many were later demolished or hidden. Mainstream historians attribute buried ground floors to landfill, street raising, or floods, and the architectural fluorescence to rapid industrial era wealth. But there's plenty of examples where you have these stories behind these buildings that just don't make any sense, like building giant schools for 10 students. And so the mudflood enthusiasts remain unconvinced. I amongst them. I'm not convinced of the mainstream explanations because they're clearly lies. And they see a pattern of hidden history beneath our cities. Whether or not one accepts the global flood scenario, which I don't consider it a global flood, I consider it just a shifting of the ground and mud rising up. Totally different from a flood like the day of Noah. But the mysterious uniformity and ambition of 1800s architecture and the literal depths of some of these building foundations continue, and rightfully so, to fuel theories of a lost civilization hiding in plain sight in our city landscapes. We just don't pay attention to it. Kind of like when you read the Bible for the first time and you just gloss over everything. You're just not looking for it. And then when somebody shows you something, like you read a Michael Heiser thing about the divine council, and suddenly it opens everything up. Like, oh, this makes sense now. The seed war, fallen angel offspring, all of this, it makes it all come to life. Same thing with this here. And then we had, the world fairs, and I'll show you some other buildings here where the base, you can see where it's pretty clear that, you've got an entrance right here buried pretty far underground. And you can see here where windows just don't make sense. It's pretty crazy. Here's a close-up of it. And you can see there's a door half buried here. You've only got part of the door. The rest of it is underground. So it's pretty clear, and then, you can see they're reconstructing some things here and laying new concrete, but it's really bizarre. This is a structure from one of the world fairs that was allegedly made out of wood and plaster. Does that look like wood and plaster to you? Because it doesn't to me. And then more here and here. And to me, this looks like at some point a much larger door frame with a window above it. And this was bricked in. That's what it looks like to me. I'm conjecturing a bit here, but the doors look newer up here, and so does the brick. This is older brick, and this looks like it was bricked in, because that's clearly an entrance with steps coming up to it, and it's been bricked in. So this door was probably way more massive. You can see it again here. It's pretty crazy. And then I will show this to you later, but it's pretty cool stuff. It has to do with some of the World Fair stuff, like this Columbian Exposition lookout over the basin and the Court of Honor. And this view from the roof of the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building looks from southeast, northwest over the Great Basin. And this, they say, made with wood in plaster and was later just torn down for the heck of it. The World Fair's over. Let's just tear it all down and whatever and burn it. It's amazing. And we buy the explanation. It's incredible. So these World Fairs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries are a focal point of Tartaria enthusiasts who suspect these events were not mere celebrations of progress, but rather cover-ups for an older civilization's architecture and technology. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, dubbed the White City, is emblematic, right? In the official narrative, an army of architects and workers miraculously erected over 200 enormous neoclassical buildings the size of palaces, as you can see in the photo here, in under 2 years, only to destroy most of them immediately after the fair. And researchers marvel at period descriptions of the fair. Electric lighting illuminating buildings that rivaled old world wonders, gigantic domes, fountains, moving walkways, and towering Ferris wheels. I'll show you one in a few. How did a young city like Chicago, barely recovering, right, from the 1871 fire, achieve this virtually overnight? The fair's apologists say many structures were built cheaply of wood and staff plaster. Essentially, stage sets meant to last for just mere months. And indeed, most of the White City was torn down or burnt by 1894. And yet conspiracy theorists posit an alternate story. These grand expo buildings were not built from scratch at all, but were the unearthed and refurbished remains of Tartarian cities. So they note that several world fairs around that era similarly featured out-of-place grandeur. For example, the 1904 St. Louis Exposition and the 1915 San Francisco Fair both showcased magnificent European-style palaces and elaborate infrastructures, only to be largely dismantled afterwards. Skeptics find it hard to believe that authorities would spend enormous, well, I guess we shouldn't, because our authorities are pretty dumb when it comes to spending money and doing things, but still, this seems an impossible working feat, right? So to spend this enormous effort to construct marble column temporary buildings only to destroy them, unless the structures were originally there and needed to be explained away. One telling line in a contemporary account of the Chicago Fair muses that the exposition's dozens of ornate mammoth buildings were, quote, said to have been constructed in just a few years and then torn down immediately afterward, unquote. And this leads the author to question whether these buildings were truly built from scratch or if they were older structures that were unearthed, refurbished, and later demolished to maintain the official narrative. In other words, the fairs might have been a grand exercise in repurposing Tartarian megastructures one last time before hiding the evidence. And then my question becomes, why hide the evidence? But we'll get to that at the end. So researchers have dug up some intriguing facts that support the reclaimed architecture theory. It turns out dozens of international expositions were held in the 80s, far more than the few famous ones that we recall. One compilation lists over 75 World's Fairs, 1870 alone. In between 1850 and 1915, fairs with colossal exhibition palaces occurred in cities worldwide: Paris, Vienna, Philadelphia, Melbourne, many featuring the same or similar Greco-Roman architecture with the grand domes and exhibition halls improbably built in a flash. Even more curiously, no wartime or economic crisis halted the fair spectacles. 22 international expos took place during the brutal years of World War I. How, alternative historians ask, could resources and manpower be found for such frivolity amid global turmoil? It doesn't make sense. One suggestion, the fairs weren't built at all. They were staged on pre-existing sites of the old world, which had survived into the 19th century and were later dismantled under the guise of fair closures. So Chicago's own fairs bolstered this narrative. In 1933, Chicago hosted the Century of Progress exposition only 40 years after the 1893 fair. Rather than neoclassical style, the 1933 fair celebrated Art Deco modernism. However, there was a direct architectural link. The Museum of Science and Industry building used in 1933 was in fact the last major remnant of the 1893 fair. It was originally built as the Palace of Fine Arts, one of the only fireproof permanent structures in 1893. It survived demolition, and it was later rehabilitated and opened just in time for the 1933 World's Fair, repurposed as the Science Museum. And so the lone survivor of the White City became a centerpiece of the Century of Progress, a suggestive continuity. Tartaria enthusiasts take it a step further and say that perhaps many expo sites were existing old world complexes that organizers simply spruced up. Indeed, some fair buildings that did not get demolished ended up serving as government halls, museums, or universities afterwards, as if the fairs were a transfer ceremony of infrastructure. And if they were just built of wood and plaster, how do you explain that? Why are they still here, built of marble and stone? It doesn't make any sense. Again, I would ask, does that look like wood and plaster? The World's Fair scholars have noted the almost uncanny similarity in layout and style across different fairs. The repetition of monumental domes, towers, gardens, and canals in fair after fair hints at a common template. One could even say the fairs themselves traveled, their components popping up in different cities. There's one fringe theory that holds that the powers of the day intentionally showcase these inherited wonders to the public briefly, maybe to acclimate people to advanced architecture and then erase them. In other words, in the words of one researcher, quote, "We're being taken for fools if we believe they were intended to be disposable," unquote. So the transient splendor of the expos, on the heels of which their grounds often burned or were razed accidentally, smacks of a cover-up to those so inclined, right? Whether or not one accepts that fairs where Tartarian cities were born, it is true that they represent an immense cost and effort for structures used for months, technological feats like electric illumination of entire cities before most towns even had power, and an accelerated destruction that leaves historians scratching their heads. The world's fairs remain, in the Tartaria narrative, a glimpse, at a palimpsest, the reused canvas of an older civilization's urban genius, and briefly revealed and quickly obscured. The mainstream narrative doesn't make any sense. Not when you're looking at stuff like this. Here's the fairgrounds from the north end looking south. For those of you who are watching the video, on the lower left, you've got 4 passenger cars stopped at Mount Vernon Station along the fair's 3-mile-long electric-powered elevated intramural railway system. The shoreline of Lake Michigan is seen at the left over here, and many of the 37 state buildings appear in the middle of the image, and the domes and rooftops of most of the great exhibit halls stand in the background over here. Cute, but apparently just temporary wood and plaster. So, one of the most extraordinary intersections of technology and mysticism occurred at the opening night of the 1933 Chicago's World Fair, and it centers on the star Arcturus. So on May 27th, 1933 at 9:15 p.m., fair organizers literally harnessed starlight to activate the fair's lights. From 4 separate observatories across the U.S. at Yerkes, Harvard, Allegheny, and Urbana, the telescopes were trained on Arcturus. As the Earth turned, the star's light, which had been traveling through space for decades, was captured by photoelectric cells. Now, the infinitesimal currents from these cells was amplified and sent via telegraph wires to Chicago, where it tripped a switch to flood the fairgrounds with light. Before a crowd of 30,000 at the Hall of Science, Chicago's dignitaries announced that a beam of Arcturus, which had left the star in 1893 during the previous World's Fair, was now arriving to open the new expo. So this dramatic stunt was intended as a symbolic link between the 1893 fair and the 1933 Century of Progress. Science and industry literally powered by the cosmos. Eyewitnesses' accounts and fair records describe the moment in almost spiritual terms. Fair President Rufus Dawes proclaimed to the hushed crowd, quote, "We remind ourselves of that triumph of 1893 tonight by taking rays of light that left the star Arcturus During that exposition, we shall use these rays to put into operation the mysterious forces of electricity, which will light our grounds, decorate our buildings with brilliant colors, and move the machinery of the exposition." Unquote. And the phrasing, mysterious forces of electricity unleashed by starlight, hinted at something almost occult-like happening under the guise of science. The fair's theme of technological progress, it was sort of a masterstroke, right? And as one journalist put it, quote, "Could a more perfect marriage of poetry and science ever be arranged?" Unquote. So the public marveled that night as a star 40 light years away, then believed to be exactly 40 light years distant, matched the years since 1893, became the literal torchbearer for modern achievement. And beyond the spectacle, some researchers see deeper significance in the Arcturus event. Arcturus is one of the brightest stars in the northern sky and has been steeped in mythology for millennia. So the ancient Greeks named it Arcturos, the bear guardian, watching over the celestial bear, Ursa Major. So in ancient Egyptian and Syrian lore, Arcturus was revered as the keeper of heaven, with temples erected in its honor. So to esoteric thinkers, the fair's tapping of Arcturus's light wasn't just a cute astronomical trick. It symbolically harnessed celestial energy and perhaps paid homage to cosmic powers. Some have even suggested that the ceremony had an occult dimension. By synchronizing human activities, right, the fair's opening, with the reception of starlight, the organizers could be seen as conducting a ritual linking earth and sky. And now, while mainstream historians view Arcturus lighting as a clever publicity stunt enabled by new photoelectric technology, alternative narratives linger. And they ask, if a single star's photons could trigger massive lights, what else could be done with cosmic energy? And so Nikola Tesla and others had speculated about drawing power from space. Here, in a highly public way, starlight literally powered machinery, right? Even if only indirectly. So the fair loudly touted the wonders of science, but in doing so, it echoed ancient star worship in a modern form. It is a rich image, right? The beams of a star that shone on the lost white city of 1893, returning like a cosmic telegram to flip the switch in 1933. In a documentary, a blend of fact and spiritual metaphor, the Arcturus event stands out as a moment where the electricity of heaven touched the material world, a poetic hint that perhaps the ancients and the secretive architects of fairs knew more about tapping the wheelwork of nature than we realize. Like so many other things. At the very least, it's a reminder that even our modern celebrations hide an undercurrent of the mystical. After all, the fair could have used a simple signal, right? But they chose a star, Arcturus, the watchman of the bear. And it became the fair's cosmic patron, bridging 40 years of history in a single flash of light. Pretty impressive for a bunch of people riding around in horses and carriages. And check out that Ferris wheel, right? 36 cars, each car capable of holding 60 people each. And a 50-cent ticket gave passengers 2 full revolutions, taking about 20 minutes. Pretty cool. 250 feet in diameter. Pretty spiffy. And you can see all the stuff around it, right? Weird domed buildings. Anyway, no exploration of hidden technology is complete, of course, without mentioning Nikola Tesla. Obviously, he's known as the visionary inventor at the center of free energy lore, right? So he comes into play here because I think free energy may have a lot to do with the demise of Tartaria and money and power and control. Tesla's well-known achievements, right? AC power, radio, induction motors, only scratched the surface of his work. He also pursued more enigmatic ideas involving atmospheric electricity, radiant energy, and the ether. In the early 1900s, Tesla filed several patents that, in hindsight, read like blueprints for harnessing invisible natural energy. One remarkable example is his 1901 patent for an apparatus for the utilization of radiant energy. In it, Tesla described a device that can passively collect energy from the environment, right? Energy from the sun, cathodic rays, ultraviolet light, things of that nature, using a capacitive antenna plate and ground connection. He notes that these radiant emissions are generally considered ether vibrations of extremely small wavelengths, endorsing the then common view that an ether fills space and carries high frequency vibrations. Tesla then explains his discovery. If you expose an insulated metal plate to these rays while giving the other terminal of a capacitor a path to ground or an opposite charge, right? Quote, he says a current flows into the condenser so long as the plate is exposed to the rays, and an indefinite accumulation of electrical energy takes place. After a time, this energy can discharge in a powerful pulse capable of doing work. So in essence, Tesla outlined a free energy device, something that could charge itself from the ambient environment, not just like a solar panel, but all of the energy around it. And what we might liken to maybe a cosmic solar panel, even working in the dark because it's drawing on other energies. So this patent is not a conspiracy theory. It was granted and is part of the record. Tesla built prototypes of these radiant energy receivers, which some researchers believe tapped into what he called cosmic rays, or the electrical potential of the atmosphere. Notably, the device essentially uses the earth and sky as the two poles of a giant capacitor, the same principle by which thunderstorms accumulate charge. And that's a lot of energy. So Tesla wrote that the atmosphere has and can supply positive electricity while the earth supplies the negative. And by connecting to both, one could draw energy. And he even calculated that with a large enough collecting sheet, sufficient height, one could power motors continuously. And such ideas were far ahead of his time and largely ignored or ridiculed by mainstream science after Tesla's death, I think purposely as propaganda from people who wanted money, power, and control. But they hint at a knowledge of etheric energy that was left by the wayside. So Tesla's belief in the ether was firm. He disagreed with the emerging relativity theory, insisting that ether was a real, tangible medium filled with endless energy. And in a 1904 article, The True Wireless, he famously wrote this, quote, "Throughout space, there is energy. Is this energy static or kinetic? If kinetic, and this we know it is for certain, then it is a mere question of time when men will succeed in attaching their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature," unquote. So this quote encapsulates Tesla's grandest vision that the earth and sky are brimming with limitless power, kinetic ether, which we could tap if we only understood how. He attempted exactly that with his most ambitious project, the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island from 1901 to 1905. Wardenclyffe was designed as a huge resonant transmitter. Tesla called it a magnifying transmitter to send energy through the ground and air without wires. Unbeknownst to many, Tesla's goal was not just wireless telegraphy, but wireless power, period. And he wanted to light lamps across the world by transmitting electricity through the Earth's Schumann's resonance and the conductive ionosphere. And this was essentially a plan to plug into the ether's wheelwork and broadcast usable energy. Does that make sense? So what happened? Well, the popular narrative is that Wardenclyffe failed due to financial trouble. J.P. Morgan, who initially funded Tesla, cut him off when he realized that there was no way to put a meter on wireless power. As you all know, I'm sure you've heard. No profit in free energy, right? So as one modern energy journalist put it, Morgan saw Tesla's dream of free electricity as a direct threat to their business model. It's like watching an 1800s version or an early 1900s version of The Blacklist from Netflix. Anyway, Morgan saw Tesla's dream of free electricity as a direct threat. And with funding withdrawn, Tesla's tower never went fully online that we know of. By 1905, Tesla was bankrupt and Wardenclyffe was eventually demolished. Its metals sold for scrap during World War I. And this abrupt end to Tesla's boldest experiment has given rise to endless speculation, and rightfully so. Was it merely a business decision or deliberate suppression? I guarantee you, when you look into the figures involved, it looks like deliberate suppression. And some argue that powerful interests could not allow an infrastructure shattering technology to thrive. Tesla himself lived many more years, reportedly continuing experiments in secret, which to me also shouts deliberate suppression. Why do it in secret unless you've been warned or told? And you're having to do your research in private and hidden now because they're onto you. So when Tesla died in January of 1943, the story takes another mysterious turn, right? The U.S. government agents from the Office of Alien Property swooped in and seized all of Tesla's papers and lab notes from his hotel room, locking them away as a matter of national security. Among these papers were designs for particle beam weapons, or death rays, that Tesla had talked about in his final years, as well as who knows what regarding wireless energy and ether theory. So the FBI and military had a keen interest in anything Tesla left behind that could be weaponized or that they feared enemies might exploit, like direct energy weapons that we think we're even seeing in use today. And after a cursory analysis by an expert, Dr. John G. Trump, if that sounds familiar, it should, incidentally, the uncle of a future U.S. president, the official line was that nothing of importance was in Tesla documents. Of course not. Of course there wasn't. No new workable principles were found, according to Trump's reports. But many researchers doubt this narrative. Really? Why? It sounds completely honest, right? Perfectly honest. No. In fact, later in 1945, these of Tesla's beam weapon notes were sent to a secret military project, Project Nick, to see if his ideas could be developed. That project's results vanished from public record, and Tesla's original notes, strangely, went missing. Of course they did, from the archives thereafter. And decades later, declassified FBI files revealed the intense interest in Tesla's ether technology. Some of Tesla's papers were eventually released to his homeland, Yugoslavia, in 1952, but Western scholars had limited access for years. The paucity of documents and the cloak of secrecy around Tesla's more unconventional research have fueled the notion that his most revolutionary inventions were totally suppressed, either locked away by governments or allegedly lost due to that era's reluctance to challenge orthodox science. Thank you, science, for all of your douchebaggery. This is a very large crowd at the Columbian Expo, 1893. Look at all those hats. And look at that. And nifty. That is a huge expo hall, the agricultural building, and a replica woolly mammoth and giant octopus displayed in the anthropology building. Pretty interesting. So, to summarize, Tesla's legacy in the Tartaria alternative history narrative is that of the tragic genius who tapped into forbidden energy. And the only reason it's forbidden, of course, is because certain people in power would lose money and control over you, the masses. So his radiant energy device patent proves he was working on drawing power from the environment. And I think that's what they were doing in the antediluvian world with pyramids and all these other massive structures that are aligned with ley lines, starlight, different solar patterns, everything. And so his public statements show he viewed the ether as the key to limitless power. His grand free electricity system was arguably shut down by financiers once they realized its implications. And upon his death, his research effectively disappeared into secret vaults. To believers, this is a classic case of knowledge being removed from the public domain. So what if Tesla's breakthroughs had been embraced instead of hidden? They have been embraced, just not by us. I promise you somebody has the tech. They just don't share it with us. So humanity might have been granted energy freedom, right? A notion that dovetails with the Tartarian mythos, where ancient cities supposedly had wireless energy, right? Think of all those dome top towers and obelisks as Tesla coils. And indeed, many Tartaria enthusiasts view Tesla as someone who rediscovered principles known to the old world, only to be thwarted by the New World Order. It's a dramatic interpretation, but Tesla's real life provides plenty of factual nuggets to support it. Groundbreaking patents, megalomaniacal projects, clashes with moguls, and posthumous secrecy. And in the quest to blend factual narrative with spiritual themes, Tesla stands as a Promethean-like figure, bringing the fire of the gods, ether energy to humanity, only to have it taken away. So more weirdness here in the photos for those who are looking. This is a Russian exhibit, stands inside the manufacturing liberal arts building. Pretty ornate, pretty interesting. It looks like these people don't like having their picture taken, to me anyway. Look like a pretty busy thing. And of course we have this 65-foot tall statue covered in gold leaf. Yeah. Meant to represent the strength of the American Republic. Right. It looks like demigod worship to me. And you can see the rest of the demigods all standing up here on the top. Very interesting. It's really interesting to me how, well, we'll get to this at the end. So one of the greater turning points in modern science and with this whole Tartarian thing was the abandonment of the ether theory. Up through the 19th century, physicists believed in a subtle, all-pervasive medium, the luminiferous ether, which carried light and electromagnetic waves. It was an invisible substance filling space, akin to the spirit of the physical world. So many early scientists were, in a sense, natural philosophers open to metaphysical concepts. However, experiments like the Michelson-Morley interferometer test in 1887 famously failed to detect Earth's motion through any ether. And Einstein's relativity in 1905 dispensed with the need for an ether altogether. So by the 1990s, mainstream physics declared there is no ether, only vacuum. And this was more than a scientific paradigm shift. Some argue it was the expulsion of the life force from physics. But I think both cases are wrong. I don't think you have to have Earth motion to have ether. But anyway, the point where science and spirit fully split. As one retrospective notes, the concept of ether has largely been superseded by modern theories in physics and dropped from accepted science. So in the eyes of alternative historians, this was a kind of suppression, the erasure of a key idea that could bridge material science and spiritual energy. So why does ether theory matter for Tartaria and ancient civilizations? Well, because many researchers believe that pre-modern cultures understood and utilized etheric or subtle energies in their technologies and architecture. If the ether is real, it could be the medium of free energy and also of consciousness, the stuff of telepathy, ley lines, chi, prana, and so on. And there's a tantalizing theory that the great architecture of antiquity, from pyramids and ziggurats to cathedrals and star forts, were deliberately designed to concentrate and channel etheric energy, sometimes equated with telluric currents or atmospheric electricity, or all of the above. For instance, the ornate spires, domes, and minarets of sacred buildings might not be purely aesthetic or religious symbols at all, but functional components of an energy network. A fringe analysis of star forts goes so far as to claim they were more than defensive bastions. They were energy hubs. One's quoted as saying, quote, "The Tartarians created star forts and star cities as a vibrational frequency ecosystem to provide a sense of joy and harmony, built with sacred geometric patterns that represent the cosmos." So in this view, star forts with their geometric bastions and moats could harness and amplify natural energy, maybe resonating with the Earth's magnetic field or sound frequency. And some researchers imagine a global grid of such structures transmitting power and information through the ether, much like Tesla's wireless system. So there are indeed intriguing features in old architecture that support these ideas, right? Gothic cathedrals, for example, often have metal finials and intricate lattice spires reaching into the sky. Could they have been drawing atmospheric electrostatic charge? And then many cathedrals and temples also incorporate acoustic resonance. Think of chants, right? Organ music reverberating in stone vaults. possibly tuning into healing or consciousness altering frequencies. The ubiquitous presence of dome and spire designs around the world, right? The Kremlin's onion domes, the Ottoman and Mughal domes with finials, state capitol domes in the U.S. topped with statue antenna, is noted as a sign of common knowledge all over the world. Domes accumulate charge or ether, and spires discharge or direct it. Even obelisks and towers might have served as receivers or transmitters in an etheric grid. One colorful theory posits that many thousands of red and white striped lighthouse-like towers around the world were not just for navigation, but actually devices to store and distribute atmospheric energy captured by star fork complexes. The evidence for this is anecdotal. It is true that the old world built some incredibly sophisticated structures with purposes and materials that we still debate. For instance, the true function of the Great Pyramids or Stonehenge remains completely controversial. Is it a power plant, observatory, spiritual machine, all of the above? Who knows? So the suppression of ether theory meant that Western science, after 1900, no longer considered these possibilities credible. Any technology or architecture based on subtle energy became relegated to pseudoscience or the occult. And some alternative historians argue this was a deliberate move by elites to disconnect people from natural energy sources and make them dependent on metered fuels and electricity because they owned it. They owned the fuel. They did the same thing with medicine. All your natural remedies that really often work better were considered witch doctory, and you were to take their petroleum-based pill products. And the pharmaceutical industry was born and has grown ever since. And it's notable that many inventors of the late 19th century who pursued etheric energy, like Tesla, but also others like John Keeley with his sympathetic vibratory physics, were all marginalized or forgotten. In contrast, the Tartarian narrative suggests that the old empire had mastered ether physics, enabling things like wireless lighting, anti-gravity airships, even miraculous healing technology, all of which was systematically suppressed or reattributed in the modern era. Now, we do have hints from the historical record that sound almost like science fiction. For example, some 18th century reports, often by Jesuit missionaries or explorers, tell of Asian legends of vast mirrors that could ignite ships at a distance, or singing bells that levitated stones, possibly garbled accounts of advanced tech. And curiously, a few Western mystics continued to hint that great secrets lingered in Central Asia. Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society wrote in the 1880s of hidden masters in the Himalayas guarding ancient wisdom. Rudolf Steiner spoke of ancient clairvoyant technologies. Even in fiction, James Hilton's Lost Horizon in 1933 envisions a high civilization in the mountains, like Shangri-La, and it's as if the concept of Tartaria as a repository of ancient knowledge never really died, but went esoteric and underground. One concrete example is Swedish theologian Emanuel Swedenborg, that we talked about earlier. He explicitly wrote that a primeval text source of spiritual wisdom survived in Tartary and was used by people in Central Asia who were closer to original truths. This bizarre claim implies Tartary's people had access to something the West lost or buried or suppressed. In Swedenborg's theology, these Tartarians were not Christians, but possessed the ancient word of God or the gods and acknowledged a single deity, which fascinated Swedenborg's followers. Some of Blake's poetry later cast Tartary as a land of primordial wisdom, stifled by Urizen, the tyrant of reason. And so could it be that wisdom included understanding of the ether and earth energies? Now, from a practical standpoint, if one assumes the ether or earth energy grid is real, right? See, look how lit up that is. Pretty darn cool stuff. Very cool. It would have been really interesting to visit these world fairs. Got to be honest with you. We have Old Vienna, a building called 40 Ladies from 40 Nation, World's Congress of Beauty. Yeah, well, that's a winner of a photo there. From a practical standpoint, if one assumes that ether or earth energy grid is real, then many ancient architectural practices make new sense, right? The orientation of temples to cardinal directions, the placement of monuments on geomagnetic hotspots or ley lines, the use of specific materials like quartz, granite, limestone, which have piezoelectric or paramagnetic properties, all could be seen as intentional measures to interface with the planet's energy field. Some star forts, for instance, are built on strategic peninsulas or confluences where water flow and land geometry might amplify such energy. And nearly all sacred structures have sacred geometry embedded, right? Geometry that some researchers say is attuned to vibrational patterns of the ether. As one fringe source puts it, quote, star fortresses and complexes of temples, domes, towers, minarets, obelisks processed and distributed electromagnetic energy through the earth. Pyramids, star fortresses, many were so powerful they had to be submerged or destroyed when the new order came. Such claims are obviously unorthodox, but they paint a dramatic picture of an advanced spiritual tech society. You can call it Tartaria or Atlantean or whatever, that built a network to harness the planet's own etheric forces. And then a cataclysm and a cover-up leading humanity to reinvent electricity the hard way. Or it's being done for money and control, or all of the above, whatever. But by suppressing the ether, 20th century science may have closed the door on this line of inquiry, at least openly to the public, and only in recent decades have concepts like zero-point energy or vacuum energy been cautiously considered by a few scientists, essentially revisiting the ether in new forms, right? Nothing new under the sun here, folks. Nothing new, just like Ezekiel said. Lots of photos here still from these world fairs. The Mammoth Cheese, Canada. Man, I think we'll leave it right there. We still wonder, right? This etheric architecture survives in mystery, right? And we wonder how medieval builders knew to create awe-inspiring acoustics in cathedrals, or why certain ancient sites seem to align with constellations and magnetic lines. How the heck do they do that? And why? That's a lot of trouble to go through. If you've ever built anything, it's hard enough just to build, let alone built it in exacting ways like this to align with constellations and magnetic lines. So were they merely artistic and religious, or also functional in an energy sense? The Tartaria enthusiasts posit the latter, and I kind of agree with them. Can't prove it, but it's definitely interesting. And they see the grand cathedrals and capitol domes of the 1800s, those that resemble older world temples, as the last expression of ether-informed design. Not coincidentally, many of those were among these structures later demolished, of course, or remodeled, which really means destroyed, in the 20th century. It's as if a new architectural era deliberately moved away from that style, right? Think of the shift to modernism, right? Efficient, unornamented steel and concrete boxes, utterly divorced from alignments and resonance. They didn't care. So in sum, the suppression of the ether concept can be viewed as both a scientific and a spiritual loss. It erased the theoretical foundation for technologies like Tesla's and severed continuity with the ancient mindset that all nature is alive with energy. If indeed the pre-modern empires had ways to capture spiritual or etheric energy through architecture, music, and ritual, those were largely dismissed as superstition by modern experts. But to open-minded researchers, like I try to be, the clues are still there in stone and story. They strive to reassemble the puzzle, connecting the domes and star forts, the myths of power-bearing arcs and crystals, the little G-gods and all their stories, perhaps interpreted as powerful initiates or even advanced beings who were said to guide early civilizations. Whether or not one believes in a grand Tartarian free energy empire, this exercise reminds us that many of the ancients and enlightened 18th and 19th century figures like Tesla or Swedenborg saw energy and spirit as one continuum. The modern world might have suppressed that idea, but it has not killed it. It is resurfacing, And like ether, it permeates the background, waiting for a new generation to detect it again. And I think this generation is quickly doing it. So even though Tartaria faded from maps, there are still tantalizing references to it and what it represented. And it all persists in older and underused sources. If you look, a Renaissance and Enlightenment era explorers, missionaries, and even secret society writings contain hints that Tartary was more significant than later history admits. For example, Jesuit missionaries in the 17th century frequently wrote of their travels in Tartary. One Jesuit, Martino Martini, what a great name. It sounds like an SNL skit name, right? Like, who was that? Father Guido Sarducci. Remember him? Anyway, published Bellum Tartaricum, 1654, an eyewitness account of the Manchu, whom he called Eastern Tartars, a conquest of China. So this Latin work, soon translated into English, treated the Tartars as a formidable imperial force, a clear indication that Western scholars of the time viewed Tartary as an empire of note, not a fictional footnote. In 1247, the Franciscan friar John de Plano Carpini, again, Father Guido Sarducci, had similarly reported on the Mongol Tartar Empire to the Pope, describing the vast reaches of Tartary. Such reports kept alive Europe's image of Tartary as a land of great khans and possibly great secrets. Marco Polo's travels, a few decades later, through Cathay and Tartary, further cemented the mystique of the far Asian North. And interestingly, 18th century's encyclopedias treated Tartary matter-of-factly, right? As we mentioned earlier, 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica, for instance, devoted a long entry to Tartary, explaining it as a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia on the north and west, called Great Tartary, and subdividing it into Astrakhan, Uzbek, Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and the tone suggests that Tartary was common geographical knowledge then. And then you fast forward to the 19th century's end, Britannica's 9th edition in the 1870s had quietly removed that Grand Tartary entry, dispersing the content under nation names. And of course, conspiracy theories seize on this as evidence of deliberate historical revision, because it is. And they ask, if Tartary was just a generic term, why bother erasing it so thoroughly that today's people barely recognize the name? You ask 100 people coming out of Walmart, and I almost guarantee you most of them are going to think that you're referencing a side item on a food tray for fish, tartar sauce. So they suspect that sometime or somewhere between 1770 and 1870, a decision was made to wipe Tartaria from history books as an empire, leaving only the fragmented stories of Mongolia, Turkestan, and Siberia. And so by the early 20th century, one finds only passing references. Owen Lattimore's High Tartary in 1930 is a travelogue in Xinjiang using the archaic term, perhaps for exotic flair. But no one was being taught about a once mighty Tartar empire anymore. So beyond conventional records, Tartaria lurks in occult and secret society writings as well. We saw how William Blake, versed in esoteric lore, identified Tartary with ancient wisdoms suppressed by authoritarian religion. But Blake didn't invent that notion. He picked it up from Emanuel Swedenborg. And Swedenborg, a mystic who conversed with angels by his own claim, he wrote in True Christian Religion that a certain people dwelling in Great Tartary possess a scripture of the ancient world, which Europe had lost. In Swedenborg's theology, these people of Tartary were living descendants of an ancient church preserving truths from before the Bible, allegedly. This surprising assertion about Tartary was taken seriously by Swedenborgians, those who followed him, and it implies that in Enlightenment mysticism, Tartary was considered a repository of antediluvian knowledge, perhaps even the original cradle of spiritual word. And some Swedenborgian scholars in the 19th century actually tried to identify tribes of texts in Central Asia that could fit the description. They looked at things like the Kalmyk peoples or apocryphal text in Asia. And while no solid evidence emerged, the idea itself is interesting. An influential Westerner believed the literal word of God might be hidden in Tartary. Now, Freemasonry and other secret societies, always fascinated with sacred centers and lost wisdom, also made oblique references. So one 19th century Masonic encyclopedia discussing holy mountains in myth notes, quote, "Geographically, this mountain is evidently the tableland of Tartary, whose southern boundary is formed by the Himalayas," unquote. So this comes up in the context of the sacred Mount Meru, a mountain in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology said to be the center of the world. The author recognizes that the real high plateau fitting that myth is in Tartary, or Central Asia. He goes on to say that the custom of a sacred three-peaked mountain was shared by Tartars, Hindus, and even echoed in Jewish tradition, right? Not all of its three peaks. So why does this matter? Well, it shows that esoteric scholars placed Tartary at the heart of world mythical geography, essentially identifying it as the axis mundi, the world center in ancient belief. So if one thinks of secret societies preserving Atlantean or antediluvian lore, Central Asia, Tartary, often comes up as a potential location for a vanished great civilization that some have connected to Atlantis or Hyperborea theories. Moreover, some researchers point out that the very phrase Tartar might encode tar, or the old word for raw or sun, in tar again. In other words, a duplication hinting at light, or god, or the sun god again. In other words, re-rising, as if the name itself meant land of the gods. So this is speculative linguistics, but it's intriguing when we consider phrases like the little g gods. The user questions mentions little g gods in pre-19th century explorer texts or secret writings. Explorers themselves didn't call Tartars gods. They did bring back strange legends like the story of Prester John, a mythical Christian king, some placed in Tartary, said to rule over giants and magical creatures, or accounts of Tartars consulting shamans and wind gods during war. The Mongols were rumored to carry an idol for the god of wind to ensure victory in storms. In the 1240s, Plano Carpini wrote that the Mongols, or Tartars, had a custom of passing between two fires for purification, and that they worship eternal heaven above all. So one could say the Tartars acknowledged a sky deity, Tangri, basically a primordial god, little g one from the Christian perspective. So in Enlightenment secret society circles, Tartary often symbolized the exotic repository of occult knowledge. For example, some 18th century Masonic rites, like the rite of strict observance, fancifully linked their origin to unknown superiors in the East. Not explicitly Tartary, but one can see how the mystic of Inner Asia fed these myths. In literature, Samuel Coleridge's famous poem Kubla Khan describes the emperor in Xanadu, the song by Rush, building a pleasure dome. Kubla Khan was a real Tartar Mongol ruler, and Coleridge's opium-tinged vision of his dome in Xanadu is essentially an archetype of lost grandeur. Victorian writers like Edward Bulwer Lytton, who was in occult circles, wrote of Vril, a cosmic energy, and hinted that remnants of previous civilizations lie under the Himalayas. All these pieces contribute to an allure around Tartary as terra incognita, where ancient power lingers. And finally, some highly obscure fringe sources claim that Tartary's historical adversaries, say the Romanovs or the Habsburgs, or later the Illuminati, went to great lengths to expunge references to Tartary's achievements. They sometimes highlight how maps after 1850 increasingly label Central Asia with Russian imperial names, and how Tartar shifted to a derogatory term. The very word Tartarus in Greek means hell, and so the idea, I guess, for them was Tartary demonized linguistically. So in the conspiracy view, yes, making Tartary hellish by etymology and painting Tartars as barbarians made it easier to erase their true history as enlightened God's people. Some even tie this to biblical narratives connecting Tartary to the lost tribes of Israel, or descendants of Noah's son, Japheth. In a recent Fringe article titled Tartary's Tartars, Noah's descendants, mythical giants, and the schemes of the Illuminati, exemplifies this line of speculation, blending Genesis genealogy with giant lore and secret societies. So the little g gods could refer to giants or demigod figures that appear in those legends. For instance, Gog and Magog, biblical giants often linked to Scythia, Tartary, and medieval legend. It's an eclectic mix, but the recurring theme is that Tartaria keeps popping up wherever people discuss hidden history or occult secrets. Now, in conclusion here, while Tartaria may have been dropped from mainstream history, a wealth of underused obscure sources still whisper its name, right? From Jesuit letters, 18th century encyclopedias, to mystical writings of Swedenborg and Blake. Tartary is portrayed as a real place and more, a vast empire, a source of ancient scripture, a symbol of forgotten wisdom, and these lesser-known references provide rich narrative grist for any exploration of Tartaria's hidden history. And they allow us to imagine a world where the libraries of the Forbidden City or the lamaseries of the Tibet held records of Tartary's glory, where secret brotherhoods toasted to the memory of the great Khan, and where poets invoked to signify all that has been lost beneath the onrush of modernity. In a 60-minute documentary blending fact with spiritual themes, such sources are our gems, verifiable yet obscure, quotes that spark the imagination, suggesting that the truth about Tartaria lies scattered in footnotes and forgotten archives, waiting to be reassembled, which is what we're doing in the modern age, right? So the very obscurity of these references serves the narrative. What's been lost to official history survives in lore and letters, encoded for those with eyes to see it. And maybe by bringing them to light, we inch closer to unearthing the real Tartaria, whether it was a global empire, a spiritual legacy, or a bunch of both, right? So as we wrap this up, I find this weird too, don't you? I mean, okay, and for those of you who are looking at the screen, see, darn it, I skipped past it. Man, what are we doing? Why is this doing this? There we go. Come on, cooperate. So you look at this picture that's up here now, and it's just filled with like strange beings, all naked cherub children, what looks like a emperor or a god on a ship, and an angel on the front of it and on the back of it. But I got to tell you, this reeks of something else to me. This doesn't look normal. This looks like a little g god paradise. Like, this looks like something that like the antediluvian world would have looked like, with these little g gods initially wanting to be like the Most High and presenting mankind with their architecture, their knowledge of the cosmos and how to draw energy from the planet itself, and teaching us and building these magnificent, huge pyramids and the things that they left from their initial realm in heaven to come here and replace us with their own sons, the wheat and tares growing together, and eventually eliminate humans to be remade in their own image, either through genetic tampering, breeding with us, or transhumanism. And so in the fading twilight of our journey, we find ourselves amid silent ruins and half-forgotten names, right? All this weird stuff that, you're seeing on this screen. And it is bizarre, right? Absolutely bizarro, at least I think. So we'll stop sharing there, and you can see my lovely face with glasses on again. So once it is said, a great civilization of impossible wonders span the world, harnessing energy and knowledge that modern man can only dream of, right? And adherents of this hidden history claim that many grand edifices of the past, ornate domes, star-shaped fortresses, and majestic exhibition halls, were not built by the empires we credit, but were remnants of Tartaria's empire, later demolished or repurposed to conceal a forbidden legacy, right? They speak of technologies beyond our ken, that the Tartarians developed unlimited wireless energy and drew power freely from the ether itself. And if such legends hold any truth, then an entire chapter of human achievement was struck from the record. Its monuments shattered, its wonders buried, and its very memory suppressed by those who inherited a lesser world. And yet, the Tartarian tale, however shadowed, may be but one chapter in a much older saga. Since the earliest days of humanity, the pattern kind of plays out in epic after epic in an ancient drama of knowledge, pride, and downfall. Like long before the bricks of Babel were laid, even before the flood, texts tell of heavenly beings who betrayed the Creator and gifted their illicit wisdom to mankind, right? In the book of Enoch, we read how the rebel watcher Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields. And let's not forget eyeshadow for women and things of that nature. I mean, he literally taught that for lustful reasons, and revealed metallurgy and weapons of war. And other rebellious angels taught incantations, astrology, and the secrets of heaven until they were led astray men and became corrupt in all of their ways. And this was the first echo of the pattern, right? Forbidden knowledge offered by the little g gods or the fallen ones kindled a false dawn of progress, only to drown the world in violence and draw the judgment of a great flood. And after the waters receded, the cycle resumed, right? At Babel, the first post-Diluvian city of man's ambition, right? United in one language and purpose, mankind set out to challenge God's dominion, declaring, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches into the heavens." And it was much more than that. So the book of Genesis recounts how this bold rebellion was halted not by swords or fire, but by the confusion of tongues and the scattering of people. And as one commentator observes, the post-flood civilization of Babel was defined in large part by technologies of language and knowledge oriented towards rebelling against God's design. So the Tower of Babel stands forever as a lesson. When mankind, in hubris, seeks to storm heaven with its own ingenuity, the result is dispersion and chaos. Our grand designs reduced to unfinished bricks, our vaunted unity shattered by divine decree, because we are making deals with lesser wannabe gods, and as a result, becoming corrupted and evil. And then history and myth carry this warning forward through the ages, right? In ancient Egypt, pharaohs raised golden temples to a pantheon of mighty gods, and priests practiced arts of magic and healing said to be bestowed by those deities, same ones who just give us whatever we want in return for our worship and our permission to basically rule the earth that we're supposed to be ruling. And for a time, Egypt thrived, its knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering producing wonders that still stand in the desert, right? But when Moses confronted Pharaoh, the one true God revealed those gods of Egypt to be impostors. And on the night of the Exodus, as midnight struck, the Lord's judgment fell. He struck the firstborn of man and cattle and executed judgment on all the gods of Egypt. The idols of Egypt were unmasked as powerless, their vaunted realm laid low by plagues that targeted every domain of their false deities. From the Nile, they worshipped to the sun god Ra, whom darkness eclipsed at noon. Egypt's dazzling wisdom collapsed under the weight of divine wrath, and its gods were shown to be nothing before the one true only God, the Almighty. And in Greece, we rose next with its Olympians, right? The Olympian grandeur, a civilization crowned with philosophy, art, and science, all under the auspices of Zeus and his entire pantheon. So the ancient Greeks glorified human reason and celebrated the muse of every art, right? They built shining temples of marble to honor their gods, who, according to legend, walked among heroes and bestowed favors of knowledge. They literally, rebellious angels and their children, demigods, lived among us. And yet Greece, too, saw its twilight. The oracle voices fell silent, the statues of Olympian gods eventually toppled, and that golden age gave way to conquest and ruin. What Athena and Apollo began, internal corruption and foreign iron, finished. And like a vibrant autumn leaf, Greece's glory blazed and then withered, its gods fading into myth as a new order arose. And then, of course, there are others. There is Atlantis, maybe the most captivating cautionary tale of all. Plato spoke of Atlantis as a mighty island kingdom, advanced beyond all others, basking in utopian knowledge and power. But Atlantis, the story goes, grew proud and lost their way and turned to immoral pursuits. We know this because it's highly likely that Atlantis was antediluvian, and all of humanity's thoughts, according to Genesis, were corrupt always, all the time. All they thought about was evil continually, day and night. And I had an image I meant to show you destruction of Atlantis and how the seabed floor of the Atlantic looks like the ocean floor was literally split apart like a seam right where Atlantis might have been swallowed up by the earth and sunk into the ocean, sending, possibly having to do with the floodgates of the earth opening, the waters rising, and of course the windows of heaven opening and rain falling for 40 days and nights and so on. The whole story in the fall of Atlantis. It may not, obviously it didn't happen all at once. It was probably over time that this happened. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm just going based off historic accounts. And so they forsook even their own gods. In the end, the sky itself turned against that arrogant land. The wrath of heaven came in a single stroke. One terrible night of fire and earthquakes swallowed Atlantis beneath a raging sea. So a dazzling empire sank in a day, lost for millennia beneath dark waves. So from Babel to Egypt, from Greece to fabled Atlantis, the pattern repeats, right? Divine rebellion yields brilliant heights, then catastrophic failure. Each time the false gods promise enlightenment and power and all these lovely things, and then for a season they deliver marvels, right? Until, as a result, we begin to become corrupted and evil, and our iniquity overflows and judgment crashes down. And seen in this light, Tartaria becomes yet another verse of the same mournful song. If Tartaria truly existed as more than a footnote, then perhaps its achievements were granted and cursed by the same ancient powers working behind the scenes. So imagine that in some not so distant past, the offer was made anew, right? Unlock the secrets of energy, architecture, longevity, and you'll become as gods among men. And maybe the Tartarians accepted that Faustian bargain, and for a time, wonders graced the earth again, right? Free energy humming through the air. Right? And antiquitech, right? Devices drawing power from ether and architecture so elegant and precise that it seemed to tune the very frequency of nature. Tartaria's cities, if the legends are true, shone with lights that needed no fuel. Towers that drew lightning from the sky. Its cathedrals and crystal palaces may have been more than just buildings. They were machines of a forgotten science, resonating with a cosmic force our textbooks don't acknowledge anymore. But like every empire founded on forbidden knowledge, Tartaria's splendor carried the seeds of its end. We do not know what calamity befell that realm. Some speak of fire from the heavens, others of a great deluge of mud. But across the world, we find peculiar evidence, right? Whole cities half buried, grand buildings with doors and windows submerged below street level, as if the earth itself rose up to swallow an age. And according to research on the fringe, the destruction of the Tartarian Empire is typically attributed to a colossal mud flood, a cataclysm that wiped out cities and nearly reset human history. After this disaster, the theory goes, the surviving remnants of Tartaria culture were quietly absorbed into newer empires, and a concerted effort began to erase its memory, and the history books were rewritten, crediting its feats to others and dismissing any anomalies as fanciful. And proponents suggest that the powers of the industrial age deliberately obscured Tartaria's legacy, burying evidence, modifying dates, even destroying magnificent structures, all to ensure that humanity would forget that once we almost escaped the bonds of scarcity and control. And whether one believes these conjectures or not, the lessons echoed out every time mankind partakes in the forbidden fruit of secret knowledge. The glory that follows turns to dust and silence because we're not ready for it, and we are sinful, and we turn to evil as a result. And Tartaria's ghost joins the chorus of fallen worlds, reminding us that no lie can live forever, and no tower reaches so high that heaven cannot humble it. I think of the stories of having to replace much of the population through orphan trains, which is interesting. And so now we look at this present day, right? Gazing at the horizon of our own unprecedented epic, and we have the digital Tower of Babel rising all around us, not built of brick and tar, but out of data, silicon, and code. And we live in an age of breathtaking technological wonders, artificial intelligence that promises godlike knowledge, genetic tinkering that offers to rewrite the code of life, and a global network that binds humanity together in an instant of communication, right? Our digital IDs. And our modern prophets of science and progress declare that we are on the brink of a new golden age, right? Just like the antediluvian world, the golden age of the antediluvian world where gods walked among us. Maybe they will again. I think they will. They may be closer than we think. Even eternal life and transcendence of human limitations seen within reach through algorithms and engineering. And maybe we'll even learn how to upload our consciousness into the ether and re-download it into something else and just learn to live forever. Maybe that's what that verse out of Revelation is about. That says at some point, those with that technology in them will seek death, but they'll be unable to find it. Because you just get uploaded and re-downloaded into something else. I don't know if it's a clone of yourself or something else, because we may not be fully human anymore by that point. The very same temptation that lured Eden, Babel, and Atlantis now wears the guise of transhumanist ambition, right? And technocratic utopia, like the tower builders of Genesis. And today's elite dream of conquering heaven not with a ziggurat, but with supercomputers, aiming to merge human and machine, to master nature utterly and to create a world order unified under human intelligence, or perhaps under machine intelligence. The parallels are striking and sobering. Our pursuit of AI and ultra technology has become a new religion for some, with a promise of ultimate knowledge and power that can elevate mankind to godhood. But recall the ancient pattern, right? When all men spoke the same tongue in Babel, nothing they imagined was impossible to them until God himself intervened. Now, in a time when programming language and digital media have effectively made the world one speech again, you have to ask, who is truly guiding this pursuit? In the shadows beyond the glow of our screens, the old forces still lurk, and those little g-gods of the fallen powers and principalities of ages past have never ceased seeking dominion over us or this earth. They thrive on human pride and craving, right? On the lure of secret wisdom and blasphemous crafts, and they once masqueraded as Ra or Zeus or Anki, and now they hide behind the idols of science, progress, and power. And make no mistake, the faces change, but the game remains the same. In our song, The Grey Wanderer, we say the Nephilim rise, old blood, and new skin in the lyrics. And these beings still hunger for worship, even if that worship is indirect. You know, maybe not an incense at an altar, but perhaps our obsession with self and technology and our black mirrors that we scroll through. And so our trust in the works of our own hands. And as a wise commentator noted, when the pagans sacrificed to idols, they offered it to demons and not to God. So behind every false idol, ancient or modern, tangible or ideological, there is a dark spiritual power receiving the worship that it craves. They want to be like the Most High and remake the world in their own way. They want to build it back better. So today the offerings are data in control, the altars are glowing rectangles, and the priests are billionaires in t-shirts preaching a gospel of algorithms. The spirits behind them are the same. And so is their aim, to turn the hearts of mankind away from the Creator and toward themselves. They come promising enlightenment, a new era of peace and unity and good vibrations, and even immortality through technology, the very promises of false Eden, just repackaged, reworded, using the language to deceive. But in the end, these two are false lights that lead into shadow. And God's not a wet blanket just trying to make us so we're not as powerful or smart. You don't put a 3-year-old behind the controls of a tank. In this long life of watching empires rise and fall, you can kind of see that the final act is at hand, right? We all feel it. The restless schemes of the fallen ones, they grow even more frantic because they know what many of us have forgotten, right? Their time is growing short. The ancient prophecies ring out, right? Woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down, or the adversary, to you in great wrath, because he knows that he has but a short time. And so the rebellious gods of old know their days are numbered, and they still rage and deceive in secret corners. And they are like stars about to fall, burning fierce, right? Before the darkness claims them. And their final defeat is certain. It was decreed from the beginning, and they do everything to delay it. And maybe that is why knowledge long suppressed is now bubbling to the surface, right? Why whispers of Tartaria, of hidden history and forbidden energy, they're all resounding once more, so they can come in as heroes. And in this late hour, truth presses against the seams of the world, eager to burst forth, right? The spell of amnesia cast over humanity is lifting as we awaken to anomalies in the record, to ruins that don't fit the narrative, to inventions and ideas that seem to come from someplace beyond our sanctioned history, right? It's as if we're being given one last chance to see clearly and to recognize the pattern in the players and to choose our allegiance wisely. Sadly, many are going to go for the gifts and goodies from the same old little g gods and be deceived. And so we arrive at the crossroads, right, of revelation and choice. What lesson do we take from the rise and fall of Tartaria and from Babel and Atlantis and all these other little g god empires, all these glittering kingdoms of dust that came before? I guess the final counsel would be this: awaken, shake off the comfortable lies and seek the truth with open eyes, right, and humble hearts, and question what you've been told. The pages of history are often written by the victors and sometimes by the corrupt, and there is much that has been hidden from you, not only about Tartaria, but about the very nature of this world. And do not accept every narrative at face value, even the one I'm giving you now. You should always dig and do your own research. And I hope a show like this helps you to do that and to look into things. You shouldn't even trust the mouths of kings and presidents or the screens of modern storytellers. You should ask and seek and knock, right? And most importantly, remember the one who is above all. Seek the one true God and the Lord above all lesser gods, who has watched faithfully over each generation to protect them. And in every age of darkness and deception, his light has never ceased to shine. And he alone has protected humanity when we teeter on the brink of self-destruction, because we want all those goodies, right? When we want it now, even though we're not ready for it any more than, like I said, a 3-year-old is ready to drive and utilize a tank. But we want it. Right? We want what we want. And so the little gods of ambition and technology offer dazzling illusions, but their path ends in collapse and destruction, as we've seen example over and over and over again. So the Most High God offers redemption, purpose, and rest for your souls, and his kingdom never falls. And so awaken to the real history, right, that's brought us here, and stand against the gathering darkness, not with fear, but with knowledge and faith. And as this chapter closes and a new dawn approaches, choose the ancient path of truth and life. Like in the end, all false towers crumble and false gods are going to be cast down. Those who seek the one true God will find refuge and hope beyond the falling of night. We don't have to go there. We don't have to. Do we really need all of this stuff at the expense of falling for the worship of these little g gods again? And giving them our time and our resources that really only the one true God deserves. And so I wanted to leave that at the end, because I know a lot of you in the past Tartarian video didn't like that I spent the entire time talking about God, but I believe these things are inseparable because they're major portions of history, and they involve these matters of God and the little g rebellious gods that are striving to be like him. I think many of them give their allegiance over to Hillel, the main adversary that presented himself before the divine council in Job, and challenged the one true God, Lord, without beginning or end, whereas everything else is a created being, literally challenged him before all of his people and slandered him and so on. But I still say that even though most of the rebellious angels follow after him, they still have infighting. And they still can't agree. And that's why the nations war with each other. And I'm convinced that many of the leadership of the major empires of this world may not even be led by human beings at all. I know Hebrews discusses the idea of entertaining angels unaware. Who's to say that some of these leaders in these certain bloodlines aren't angels in disguise walking amongst us even now, and you would never know it. You would never know it. And even if they're not fully angels, they may not even be fully human. They could be a hybrid, just like before the flood. Perhaps they're not developing giants these days, but they have perfected the art over time genetically of creating things that look just like us. And I'm convinced that that may be what the parable of the wheat and the tares is about. Humans and really non-humans growing together until a final harvest. I don't know, I could be wrong, and I could be persuaded otherwise, and I'm happy to be. If you have information, please share it in the comments. But definitely, for those of you who may be new to this kind of information, it it really doesn't do any good just to put a laughy face if you think this is crazy stuff. At least dig into it and look and examine it before you just roll your eyes. I mean, I know it's tempting to. I used to roll my eyes at such things. But when you actually take the time to look into it, you realize there's way more to this world than you thought there was. And so with that, if you find this interesting, I hope you do. And I hope you like this Tartarian video better than our old one and that it was useful to you. And if you have friends who would like that you think would be helped by this knowledge, by all means, share this video. Share it wherever. If you're perusing through X or some other site and you don't want to take the time to write out a full comment, just answer somebody's question like, well, I know you don't believe Tartaria existed or whatever, but here's a YouTube video from a podcast that can show you and went over the maps and when the maps were done and all the other history I provided and so on. And you can present that to them so you don't have to go through the whole thing. And I'll be more than happy to handle their critiques of it in my own comment section, which I try to keep up with, but it's been a busy week trying to finish our new album. So all you fellow pilgrims, thank you for hanging out with me for the past hour or so at the Pilgrim's Great Inn. And I hope you all have a fantastic work week. We will see you next Monday. See ya. Godspeed.
Gather round, ye travelers, lend me your ear. A tale of heroes who knew no fear. Through shadowed woods and mountains steep, their legacy lives where the wild winds sweep. Raise your tankards high and sing for the great pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Pilgrims Great. Through cursed lands where few would tread, the brave walked forth where many fled. Lanterns lit the endless night, their spirits burned a guiding light. Raise your tankard high and sing for the great pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the Chronicles of Pilgrims Great. Strong in every heart, their timeless song mirrors carried on the ale-soaked breeze, songs as endless as the trees. Raise your tankards high and sing for the great pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the Chronicles of Pilgrims.